It's kind of surprising I'm reusing this joke so soon, but... If I had a nickel for every time I made a silly little concept for a Genshin thing that became a real thing for a version X.8 character, I would have 2 nickels. Which isn't a lot, but once is an event, twice is a coincidence, and if it happens a third time, I'm gonna start labeling myself as an unofficial game dev for Genshin. 4 months ago, I made this little video about adding HSR's super break mechanic into Genshin, but instead of following the exact same formula where it's just more damage, I played around with the idea of giving transformative super reactions special property bonuses. And apparently, that's gonna be happening soon. Ineffa is going to be our new character in 5.8. She's actually someone who's from Krai, and is going to be teasing the very special gimmick for the new region, Lunar Reactions. It's very similar to Nilou's special bloom mechanic and how she reworks certain properties, but instead, Lunar Reactions are going to be a base game expansion, not a character-specific rework. As of this recording, I'm still waiting on some information on these Lunar Reactions, so for this video, we're going to specifically hone in on Ineffa and her mechanic of turning Electro-Charged into Lunar-Charged. We'll discuss what this reaction is, how it works, how it differs from its predecessor, as well as what details we can take from its mechanics. Disclaimers, timestamps, social media links, and music credits are all down below. Captions are available if you need them, and if you want to, you can join my Discord server, with the link also down below. Without further ado, open up your textbooks to chapter 5.8.1, A Look into Lunar-Charged. Here's a little glossary before we begin, because acronyms are going to be a lot more present this time around. EM is Elemental Mastery, EC is Electro-Charged, LC is Lunar-Charged, the special EC variant, and finally, Lunar Reactions are getting shortened to Lunar Actions. This last one's not really that necessary, it just rolls off the tongue for me, and sounds a lot more fun to say. And if we're lucky, I might set a new trend. Lunar Actions as a whole are going to be this completely new system. Info I'll talk about here regarding Lunar-Charged might apply to other Lunar Actions in the future, but since we don't know for sure what aspects will be consistent or not, it's safer to assume I'm just referring to the one reaction. From info we got during the beta cycle, many characters had their kit descriptions changed to accommodate for this new reaction. Thundering Fury also got a new tweak addressing the same thing. In the future, we're expecting other characters to be able to unlock or access LC for their teams, but while it's a new reaction system, we can still view these characters in a similar way to how we'd view Nilou, at least on a surface level perspective. Her whole gimmick is transforming bloom cores into bountiful cores, which alters the properties of the reaction. Lunar-Charged works the same way, in which Electro-Charged gets replaced when Ineffa's on the team. When you trigger LC, you create a thundercloud that will deal electro damage to enemies that are affected by both Hydro and Electro. This occurs once every 2 seconds, which means lightning strikes occur half as fast as an Electro-Charged tick. On the surface, this is just the fancy new visual for a new reaction, but now we have to cover some of the number-related details, because the way LC is calculated has a completely new formula for damage reactions. For starters, instead of only taking the EM stat of the unit who triggers the reaction, LC is going to take a pooled damage amount based on every character who contributed to the reaction. However, it's not an even pool. The unit who contributes the most to this instance of LC deals their full amount of damage. The second highest will only contribute half as much, and every contributor after that deals 1/12 of their damage. I want to give more of an example of how this calculation works. If Sucrose has 900 EM, Ineffa has something like 350, and Xingqiu has 100, Sucrose will obviously be the highest contributor to LC, so she contributes the full amount of around 9,500. Ineffa has half the EM stat, so her contribution of what would be 7,000 is halved to 3,500. And Xingqiu, who would contribute 5,000 damage, gets nerfed to only deal 600 damage. Pretty easy to understand, right? Higher EM means higher damage contribution, right? Well, I lied. There's more. Lunar-Charged isn't only an EM scaling ability, it also takes into account crit stats. That's right, Lunar-Charged crits. Let's keep it simple here and focus only on Sucrose and Ineffa. These two are still our top 2 contributors. Sucrose has no additional crit stats, so she's hitting around 5% crit rate and 50% crit damage. Ineffa actually wants to run crit for her kit, so let's just put 60% crit rate and 120% crit damage for this example. Sucrose is relying primarily on her high EM stat for her contribution, while Ineffa is able to use crit to elevate her damage. If Sucrose doesn't crit, her damage is 9,500 as expected. If Ineffa does crit, her contribution goes from 7,000 to around 16,000, which now makes her the highest contributor, at least for that single instance of damage. This would mean that her contribution takes the full amount, while Sucrose gets the half damage nerf. There's one more aspect I wanted to cover, but I will put a major disclaimer. I'm not 100% sure if this is correct. From what I've seen with other theory crafters, Lunar-Charged contribution is not tied to a simple aura and trigger mechanic. The reaction ticks every 2 seconds by default, and from my understanding of it, every unit who applies Electro or Hydro within this 2-second window will have their stats looked at. So, if you have Ineffa, Xingqiu, and Yai apply their elements within this time frame, you have 2 instances where Electro is applied, one from Ineffa and one from Yai. If Yai applies Electro after Ineffa, this does not mean Ineffa's stats are no longer looked at. All 3 units apply their element in the 2-second window, so all their stats are looked at. And this is good. If I have Ineffa, Yai, Xingqiu, and Yelan as my team comp, chances are Ineffa and Yai will be the 2 characters to contribute the most to LC damage. Even if they're both Electro and can't technically share an Electro aura, it should still be their EM and crit scalings affecting the LC damage the most. Once again, this is just my understanding of the reaction, and if it turns out to be false, I will correct it in a pinned comment. But when we talk about double Electro comps with Ineffa, I do think it's important to recognize that EM scaling Electros should still have a good synergy in these teams. So what I personally like about this whole new system is that it gives you a few quality of life benefits without screwing over how you approach team building or team comps compared to general EC teams. For starters, original EC teams ran into a problem when it came to reaction ownership, because general reactions only take into account the EM stat for the character who triggers a reaction. A high EM character like Sucrose will trigger EC and deal higher EC damage, but right after that, a low EM unit could apply an element, re-trigger the reaction, and cause the next instance to be lower. That's not the case for this reaction though. Yes, there is still some RNG because of crit, but because of how the pooling system works, it's much easier to build your teams around specific contributions for damage. An old EC team of Sucrose, Fischl, Xingqiu, and Beidou wouldn't have anyone except for Sucrose building EM. The application RNG was too unpredictable. It was better to have everyone build for their personal damage, while Sucrose carries the reaction portion through her own EC damage. She would also increase your team's EM to bridge the damage gap just a little bit, in case they took away from Sucrose triggering reactions. But what if we replace Fischl for Ineffa? Sucrose has a high EM floor. Ineffa has some EM synergy, but her crit stats heavily make up for that lower floor. They are for sure going to be the 2 main contributors for your team. While Xingqiu and Beidou have crit scalings, they're generally not built for EM, and that lower damage floor is likely going to place them in the 1/12 category. In other words, your team is still split between reaction damage contribution and personal damage contribution. The good thing is, both sides can better lean into their respective roles. Back then, if someone like Xingqiu were to trigger EC, his lower EM means lower EC damage. It would also take away from Sucrose's reaction damage, effectively making her EM stat lose value every once in a while. Now, you can be certain that every instance of LC will have her be one of the top contributors for your team. Even if she doesn't directly trigger LC, her EM will still retain its value. And because Xingqiu and Beidou are contributing a negligible amount for LC hits, You aren't forced to suddenly swap their builds to be EM focused. Ironically though, while you wouldn't change their builds, this new system makes certain stats better on certain characters. Units who build for personal damage still contribute something to the team's reaction damage, so rolling a couple unlucky EM stats is at least less bad to get. Meanwhile, crit becomes a bit more valuable on EM scaling characters. You can bring a high damage floor with EM and raise that damage ceiling through crit. Now this last section is a lot shorter, but I felt it was interesting to talk about. Ineffa has this passive where if LC damage occurs while her skill is active, she'll deal an additional instance of electro damage, which is actually considered as LC damage. Now, in terms of the theory crafting community, people generally label this as direct LC damage. I simply found it interesting because direct reaction damage in general never existed until now. Looking back on it, I'm kind of surprised it wasn't implemented sooner. Like, even if we kept the same EM formula, putting in a passive where a character deals additional instances of direct reaction damage is pretty cool. Reactions also don't affect auras either, so this wouldn't really affect your team building. But could you imagine if Kaveh just created his own direct bloom cores with his kit? Or if Lisa dealt her own separate Electro-Charged hits? I don't know, could have made some pretty cool niches. The formula is also pretty interesting. Being LC damage, it still benefits from EM bonuses and ignores enemy defense. But instead of the base damage being a flat number, it's replaced by an attack scaling multiplier, at least for Ineffa's case. Right now, it's listed as 65% attack, but what's weirder is that there's an additional multiplier of 3 slapped on top of that. So in reality, the base damage scales with 195% of her attack. I'm not really sure why it's not just directly labeled with that number, but maybe future Lunar Reactions will shed some light on this. Now, I don't see the concept of direct reaction damage to be anything revolutionary, but the door is now open for future characters to cover this kind of mechanic. So I'm interested to see what we might get in the future. To summarize everything, Ineffa's introduction to Lunar-Charged is going to be an awesome change for a lot of the existing Electro-Charged teams. It capitalizes on the unique strengths of different types of characters and their scalings, without disrupting any of their existing builds at the same time. That'll do it for this video. If you enjoyed, consider leaving a like and subscribe to support the channel. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts are on Ineffa's kit, as well as the Lunar-Charged reaction in general. Are you gonna pull for her? And if so, what kind of build or teams are you looking to try out? If you're interested, consider joining my Discord server, link down below. Thanks again for watching everyone, and I will see you all next time. Bye!